Thank you for joining me, your average hobbyist, in this episode of FPV Exclusive. I've decided to separate my news from my interviews because there's just so much editing involved. It's easier for me to focus on one project than the next, and I can release content a little more regularly. In this episode of FPV Exclusive, we're going to be looking at Brain FPV. There's been a huge shift from people that used to love their flight controllers, and now they're picking up the Radix from Brain FPV. So I figured we'd get them in and talk to them firsthand to figure out what they're all about. So today we have Jenny and Martin from Brain FPV. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
You're welcome.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your flight controllers. You have a graphical OSD, barometric pressure sensors, and some other really cool features. Before we get into your flight controller, I wanted to dive into your origin story a little bit. Now, Jenny, you were going to med school to try and understand language disabilities. And Martin, you were going for an electrical engineer, and you two kind of met to work on a project. Tell me a little bit about that.
Okay. So, all right. So I was in grad school and I was studying the development of the brain, and I was studying specifically like learning disabilities, language-based learning disabilities like dyslexia. So I used two different tools. One tool was an MRI, and that has really, really awesome spatial resolution. And so an MRI is a giant magnet, basically. It's that table that everybody lays in, or people lay in, and it's like a superconducting magnetic field. It's super cool. And you can render really awesome 3D images, and it shows you exactly what parts of the brain are lighting up when they're doing specific tasks. So in this case, reading and listening to words, rhyming and stuff. So then I also used another tool called EEG, and so that has it's just a bunch of electrodes, and so it is really good at telling me at what point they are processing these certain stimuli, this task.
The point in time.
The point in time, yeah, exactly, yeah. So it has really good temporal resolution, but really poor spatial resolution. And the MRI, like I said, has really awesome spatial resolution where I could render these images and show parts of the brain that are lighting up, but it doesn't tell me when they're processing these stimuli, these words, when they read them or when they hear them. And so I wanted to combine these two tools. And so Martin, he was a PhD student in electrical engineering and computer science at Northwestern, and we had started dating, and I was just I'm always complaining about everything because that's me. And so I was complaining about how I'm collecting this awesome data, and it would really cool to do this. And he was like, I can solve that problem. Like I know how to do this. So at the time we were doing signal processing and video compression stuff. Yeah. And so, we started working together. My advisor paid for the rest of his PhD. And you wrote one of or still to this day, the longest neuroscience paper, or the neuroscience paper with the most mathematical equations.
There's a lot of math. Basically trying to combine MRI and EEG and combining the data. So there's a lot of signal processing. So I was doing signal processing. And
yeah, that seems like a lot of data to crunch through. I mean, the brain is such a complex organism, and then you have to build some sort of electronic device to translate all those signals, and that's just crazy. Around that time in 2013, Martin, you were flying helicopters and getting into multi-rotors. And that's kind of where Brain FPV was born. You just weren't happy with the flight controllers out there, right? So you just decided to make your own. It's that easy.
Exactly. That's basically what happened. I had a CC3D, and I wasn't happy with it. I had an OSD, the standalone Minim OSD, like everybody had back then, and it was just kind of shitty. So I started making my own. And based then it was based on different firmware, but it already had a graphical OSD F4.
What was the firmware?
It was Tau Labs back then. Okay, yeah, okay. There was a fork of OpenPilot.
OpenPilot, right?
It was actually pretty advanced for the time. But yeah, so
yeah. So side note, all of these things that he was using to build it was all in our bedroom. So at that point we had lived in Boston, and Martin was like his faculty over at Harvard, and I was at MIT, and we were still in academia studying neuroscience stuff, and Boston's really expensive, and so we lived in this tiny 400 square foot apartment, and the office was in our bedroom. And so Martin was like soldering around, making these circuit boards. It was awesome.
Yeah, and now 6 years later, you're on your third or fourth rendition, and you have the Radix. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, first we had the original Brain flight controller, and then we had the RE1, Racing Edition 1. That was in 2015, I believe. We had the RE1, or 2016. Yeah, I think spring 2016. And then we had Radix a year ago, early 2018. We came out the Radix.
Wow.
And then we just came out with basically the smaller version of the Radix LI.
Moving on with your flight controller, I want to talk a little bit about your gyroscope. Everybody else in the industry is using like an ICM gyroscope, which is basically used for smartphones or video game motion sensing, but they're not meant to handle the abuse that our quads give them, or even the vibrations that happen. You guys decided to go with a Bosch gyro, and it has a lower sampling rate, but is said to perform better. Can you tell me a little bit about how that's possible?
This is a pretty long explanation, but
we have like a whiteboard and everything. We can like get it out.
No, but like the short story. The short story is basically that the reason why there's a certain sampling rate you have to be above. To basically, you have to sample fast enough so you don't get problems with noise that is at high frequencies. But that sampling rate is maybe like 2 kilohertz or so. If you increase the sampling rate, you get basically a faster loop. Like there's less delay from the gyro because you can disable some filters, and it gets better. But at the same time, you also increase the processing, like the amount of processing you need on the flight controller, right? If you run the PID loop twice as fast, you have to process twice as, yeah.
Yeah, if you're filtering a lot, then that's just more data that the flight controller is trying to process. But if you can clean up that data before it even gets to the flight controller, it'll make it run a lot more smooth. And that's what a lot of people are saying, is that your flight controller is making it a lot easier, and you don't have to mess with the filters in beta flight as much because your flight controller is just running more efficiently.
So the Bosch gyro, it runs slower, like you said, but there are internal filters of the gyro, and the internal filters have a bit lower delay than the filters in the ICM's gyros. So that's good. You still need additional filtering in Betaflight. We still use the Betaflight filters, but the data comes in is a bit slower, but it's cleaner generally. And that's, in my opinion, is better than having a lot of data that's very noisy. And I think actually the recent trend kind of goes in that direction too. Like Betaflight 4 has this new, like this RPM filtering, and basically recommends running things at 4 kilohertz. So they're basically coming, and ours is 3.2, so it's basically the same in terms of speed. And it's actually really good to see that people have kind of, Betaflight also removed the 32 kilohertz sampling option, because it has basically been shown that it doesn't really help.
Yeah, that's a good point. If I could expand on that, your flight controllers really get put through the ringer. You seem to put it through everything Betaflight has to offer, just so you know that it's not going to be released to the public with some sort of weird bug, because you know one bad customer can create hundreds. Not only that, but you actually have instructions with your flight controller, which is unheard of. I mean, drones don't come with directions. They're really clean, easily legible, and then your social media page is very interactive with the community as well. You're always there to help troubleshoot and fix problems. You guys really seem to have thought it all out. You know, you fly your product and you see something that's not good and like, I want to make it better. The graphical OSD, oh, there's a better gyroscope over here. Let's put that in. I could use a barometric pressure sensor. Let's do that. And it's not about the bottom line with you. It's how can I make this product better?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it shows. I mean, when you look at the board, you can see like all, how much love and passion goes into it. And and like you said, the quality control. So a lot of times the other companies that make flight controllers just order them from China, and they do everything. And so they even send them to the dealers. So they don't really have to like
The Chinese from China.
From China, yeah. Sorry. So the manufacturers like Airbot, for example, or DYS, they'll send them to like Ready Made or to Pyro.
You're creating a product that people are enjoying. They're buying from you, which helps you pay your bills. But you're making things that in turn make people happy. And they're proud of what you created. So even though you might be stuffing a couple hundred boxes, you're still proud of that because you made something cool.
Yeah.
It's all about our customers, because we wouldn't be here without them, right? So I love so for all the pre-orders, like I like to, we like to always put like something different in there, like little toy dinosaurs or like little, you may see on Instagram, or like people posting on unboxing, yeah, like googly eyes. And I mean, it is all about the user experience. And so, for me, like, I don't know, like, as far as like education and, just trying to build the quad myself, I mean, it's like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. So, like
all of us, that's every single one of us.
I test everything on our documentation. And so, we recently, for Christmas, actually, we have one more, we came out with a box with everything in it. And I made like a step-by-step build manual on like how to build the frame, how to like put the motors, like the everything. So from like the beginning to end.
So your Radix came out about a year ago, and now you have the Radix LI, and it's a 20x20 flight controller. So aside from size, what are the differences between the Radix and the Radix LI?
So there's some different. Yeah, the differences are it uses the same gyro, the same STM32, but then it doesn't have the barometer, so you don't get the altitude scale, and it doesn't have an SD card slot. So you don't have black box, but you can use a spectrograph, like you said, in the OSD to tune. And then what it has that the normal size Radix doesn't have is a 5-volt regulator, because basically all the small 20x20 4-in-1 ESCs, none of them have a 5-volt regulator on board. So we had to put a 5-volt regulator on the flight controller.
So that's something else that's different, right? Is that our normal size flight controller does not have a 5-volt regulator. And
exactly.
So, I think that a lot of other flight controllers do. And so, I don't know, maybe you want to touch on to why you decided to not include one in the full-size Radix.
I mean, like, there's a lot. I don't know, maybe we'll include one in the next revision, or in the next flight controller, another revision. But there's a lot of 4-in-1 ESCs that are the 30x30 ones that have 5-volt regulators. In addition, the 5-volt regulator typically is something that generates a lot of noise and heat, and also frequently gets breaks. So if you have it on the flight controller, if it gets damaged, you basically have to buy a new flight controller. So it's kind of like there's pros and cons to having one.
So what kind of quads do you guys fly? 3-inch, 5-inch? I'm sure you have a Radix Brain in there, but what kind of motors, cameras? Do you like freestyle? Do you have long range with a little GPS and the arrow to tell you where you are because you're probably lost?
Yeah, here I have it's just like a long range 6-inch quad. It's the Swiss knife. It's actually a racing quad originally, like it's this Gap 707 Swiss knife. Run cam split on it.
They can't see.
Run cam split, 6-inch props, crossfire. This one has the TBS endurance motors, but sometimes I also use the Hobby Wing ones. Unified Pro, prototype GPS.
Wait a minute, prototype GPS. Let's see that thing.
So we actually have a tiny GPS. It's not out yet.
Oh, that's awesome.
Why do I have like glue everywhere? Sorry, I keep finding like strings of glue. Sorry. So that's our little.
Yeah, that's
this
coming
our prototype.
out soon-ish. We're testing it.
That's great. And so will that plug right into your flight controller, into the Radix?
Into the mini.
Into the mini.
Well, it doesn't plug it. There's a cable plugs.
That's
yeah,
okay.
you have to solder for now because the flight controller only has it doesn't have additional connectors, but maybe in the future they put connector as well on the flight controller.
Oh, that's great. That's a really good
size. It becomes
size.
plug and play.
Yeah, so that's coming soon, and so you've been you've been testing it on your quads, you've been testing it on your wings. We have like a bunch of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 wings right here.
See, my wife never counts my quads and smiles. Awesome. Well, aside from the GPS, are you working on anything else? New firmware, another flight controller, any other projects?
No, for now it's mostly the GPS. That's like the first time we actually have shown it in public. And it's like the next product we're going to come out with.
And a right? Oh.
And that's all the time we have today. If you haven't already picked up a Radix flight controller, I highly suggest you do so, especially if you're going to be building a long-range drone. You can pair that with their new GPS that's coming out later this summer. Jenny, Martin, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, yeah. Thank you for
amazing.
having us.
And always look forward to FPV interviews, inside looks, and FPV news from your average hobbyist. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.